When your entire world crumbles, knowing where to start can feel overwhelming. For me, it all began on that fateful day, the moment everything truly shifted, when I received the news. Cancer. Just hearing that word was like getting punched in the gut. You never think it will happen to you, right? You hear about others battling illness, but you never imagine that you'll be facing it yourself. I can still picture myself sitting in that sterile doctor's office, the stark white walls closing in on me as he uttered the words, "Stage 2 lymphoma." Felt surreal. I didn't cry or scream. I just nodded, as if I was listening to some mundane weather report. In that instant, it was like I had stepped outside my body. Claire was right there beside me, holding my hand. She looked worried, her eyes glistening with tears as she whispered reassurances like, "We'll get through this," and "I'm here for you." Initially, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? After more than a decade of marriage? Sure, we had our ups and downs, but we were a solid team, weren't we? At least I thought we were. The initial weeks following the diagnosis blurred together in a whirlwind of doctor appointments, consultations, and preparations for treatment. Surgery loomed ahead, followed by chemotherapy. I was unprepared for how quickly everything would spiral downward. I'm not just talking about physically, although, believe me, that was a hell of its own, but about everything else, too. Our relationship. It felt as though the moment I fell ill, Claire began to drift away. I didn't catch on immediately. At first, I was too consumed by my own pain and fatigue. The chemotherapy hits you hard, sapping every ounce of energy. My body felt like a battleground, and each day was a struggle against the nausea, weakness, and suffocating despair. I won't sugarcoat it. Our intimate life took a nosedive. I barely had the strength to rise from bed, let alone engage in any romantic activity. And I could tell she noticed. We used to be all over each other, you know? In the early days, we couldn't keep our hands off one another. That kind of passion doesn't last forever, but we still had a good thing going until cancer swooped in and snatched away whatever remained. It wasn't just about intimacy. It permeated everything. Emotionally and physically, I felt like a shadow of my former self. Instead of stepping up to support me, Claire started spending increasing amounts of time away. She would tell me she had to stay late at work or that she was out for drinks with friends. At first, I accepted it without question. Why wouldn't I? She had her own life, after all. She wasn't the one battling illness. I didn't want to drag her down into my pit of despair. But over time, I began to notice little things. Her phone was constantly glued to her hand. Whenever she received a text, I'd ask who it was, and she would brush it off with vague responses, "Just work?" or "Just a friend." Yet something felt off, you know? The turning point came when Vincent made an unexpected appearance. Now, Vincent was an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't seen in years, so it was a surprise when he dropped by. Initially, we chatted casually, catching up on life. He knew about my cancer diagnosis, of course. Everyone did. Then, out of the blue, he hit me with a bombshell. He said, "Ryan, man, I don't know how to say this, but I've been hearing things about Claire." I'll never forget that sinking feeling in my stomach when he uttered those words. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, trying to maintain my composure. Inside, I was already spiraling out of control. He went on about rumors, mentioning he'd seen her out with some guy a few times. He insisted he didn't want to believe it and didn't want to say anything, but felt it was important for me to know. I tried to dismiss it, telling him he must be mistaken, but damn, that seed of doubt had already taken root in my mind. I couldn't unhear it. After Vincent left, I found myself staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. She was my wife. We were supposed to face this battle together, weren't we? I was fighting cancer, for crying out loud. How could she betray me like that? But the more I pondered it, the more it all started to add up. The late nights when she didn't come home, the flimsy excuses, her sudden fixation on her appearance, hitting the gym more often, buying new outfits. It was as if everything clicked into place in that moment, and I couldn't help but imagine the worst. I didn't confront her immediately. Couldn't. I was still too weak and exhausted, both physically and mentally. Instead, I began to observe her more closely. The way she behaved when she thought I wasn't watching, how she guarded her phone like it was some prized possession. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she truly cheating on me? Or was this all a figment of my imagination, a sick side effect of the chemotherapy and stress? In the end, I reached a breaking point. The doubt gnawed at me, eating me alive, just as much as the cancer did. I didn't have the energy for a grand confrontation, not yet, but I knew I had to uncover the truth. That's when I made the decision to hire a private investigator. I know it seems drastic, but at that point, I had lost all trust in her, and I desperately needed answers. Enter Jake. This guy was the real deal. Experienced, composed, and honestly a bit too skilled at unearthing secrets. I laid everything out for him. Claire's sudden absences, the late-night outings, Vincent's warning. Jake didn't pry into too many details. He just nodded and assured me to sit tight, saying he'd take care of everything. And that's where I decided to pause for now. I still lacked solid proof. A part of me desperately wanted to believe I was mistaken, that perhaps Vincent had misunderstood everything. But deep down, I knew the truth. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. After Vincent's visit, everything shifted. I attempted to dismiss his words, trying to convince myself it was all a big misunderstanding. But that seed of doubt he planted, man, it grew roots deep inside me. Suddenly, I couldn't unsee the signs that had always been there, but I had overlooked. Every little thing Claire did began to seem suspicious. It felt like my mind had been rewired to scrutinize her every action. Her words, her unexplained absences. She was out more frequently. Whenever I inquired about her plans, she'd give me the same rehearsed answers. Work meetings, catching up with friends, or some other lame excuse I would have accepted without a second thought not long ago. Now, each time she left, my stomach twisted in knots, my mind racing with scenarios about what she could really be up to. I became hyper-aware of her phone usage. It was always glued to her hand, perpetually buzzing with texts from someone, always busy. If I asked who it was, she'd casually dismiss it, saying, "Just work," accompanied by that fake smile. But I sensed something was amiss. The situation reached a breaking point one night during one of my chemotherapy sessions. I was at the hospital, feeling absolutely miserable, my body barely holding itself together. The drugs coursing through my veins were sapping my energy with each passing moment. In a moment of weakness, I called Claire, longing to hear her voice, craving some comfort. But she didn't answer. My call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. I sat there, waiting, staring at my phone, hoping for a text, a missed call, anything. An hour slipped by, then two. When I finally managed to reach her, she sounded irritated. "I'm busy, Ryan. I told you I'd be out tonight," she snapped. Busy? I was fighting for my damn life, and she was too preoccupied to answer her phone? At that moment, clarity hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just distracted. She wasn't merely overwhelmed by my illness. Something more sinister was at play. After that night, I reached my limit. I had to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I called Jake, the private investigator I mentioned earlier. He came highly recommended, specializing in marital infidelity. When I met him, I immediately sensed he was a no-nonsense kind of guy. He sat across from me, expressionless, as I poured out my heart. The warning from Vincent, the late nights, the emotional distance that had grown between us. Jake didn't show much emotion. He simply listened and assured me that if there was something to uncover, he would find it. He instructed me to act as if nothing had changed. "Don't tip her off," he advised. "The last thing you want is for her to catch wind that you're onto her. Just keep things normal while I investigate." So that's what I did. I played the role of the clueless, sick husband while Jake worked behind the scenes. But it was anything but easy. Every time Claire walked out the door, I couldn't help but wonder if this would be the time she went to meet him. It wasn't merely the thought of her being with someone else that devastated me. It was the realization that she could do this while I was in the midst of my greatest struggle. That level of betrayal, that coldness, it shattered something deep within me. The days dragged on. I was still enduring treatment, still fighting against cancer, but my mind was elsewhere. I was caught in a tug-of-war between surviving and uncovering the truth. Felt like I was living in two hells simultaneously. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Jake called. "We need to meet," he said. His voice as calm and professional as ever. My heart sank. This was the moment. When we met, Jake didn't sugarcoat a single thing. He laid everything out before me like evidence in a courtroom. Photos, reports, timelines. Claire had been seeing someone else. His name was Liam, a married businessman she met through work. They'd been rendezvousing at a hotel, usually on the nights she claimed she was working late or out with friends. I stared at the photos in disbelief. There she was, my wife, walking into some mid-tier hotel with another man, smiling like she was carefree. And there was Liam, some suit-and-tie jerk who likely thought he was above the rules simply because he had money. Rage bubbled within me. I wanted to tear those photos to shreds, burn them. Anything to make this reality disappear. But I couldn't. This was my life now. My wife was cheating on me while I was battling for my survival. Jake continued, providing details I didn't want to hear but knew I had to. Liam was married too, with a wife and kids. They'd been sneaking around for months, possibly even longer. Jake couldn't pinpoint when it all began, but the timeline stretched back far enough to make me sick to my stomach. Initially, I didn't know how to react. A part of me yearned to confront her right then and there, to scream at her, to demand answers. But Jake advised me to hold off. "Let me keep digging," he said. "There might be more." More? I could hardly wrap my head around what Jake had already uncovered. And now he was suggesting there was even more to learn? I felt like I might explode with frustration. But Jake had a point. If Claire was capable of such betrayal, who knew what else she could be hiding? I had to proceed with caution. Gathering all the evidence before I made any moves was crucial. So I took Jake's advice to heart. I kept my mouth shut and maintained the facade that everything was normal. Inside, though, I was slowly falling apart. Every time Claire walked through the door, I had to stifle my instincts, resisting the urge to confront her about her lies. Watching her laugh and joke, acting like everything was perfectly fine, took all my strength not to break down. I found myself replaying all the moments I had needed her. During chemotherapy, when I could barely lift my head, when moving felt impossible. She hadn't truly been there for me. No, she'd been busy. Now that I was aware of her real activities, it made me sick to think I had ever trusted her excuses. But I wasn't done yet. Not at all. I needed more information. I had to uncover just how deep her betrayal went. So I waited. While Jake continued his investigation, I played my part. The more I pondered the situation, the clearer it became that this wasn't merely about infidelity. It was about my survival. I was fighting for my life on multiple fronts, and I wasn't about to let her come out on top. Not yet. The worst part? I still loved her. Or at least, I loved the illusion of her, the woman I had married, the one who vowed to stand by me through sickness and health. But that version of her had vanished, replaced by someone I hardly recognized. And I had no clue what lay ahead. All I knew was that I had to be prepared for anything. I thought learning about Liam would signal the worst of it. I mean, how could it get any worse, right? Discovering that my wife was cheating with a wealthy, married businessman seemed like hitting rock bottom. But I was wrong, completely wrong. Turned out Liam wasn't the only one. A couple of weeks after our last meeting, Jake called me. By that point, I was doing my best to hold it together, barely scraping through each day. The chemotherapy continued to take a toll on me, and mentally, I felt like I was trudging through a fog. The thought of Claire sneaking off to hotels with another man while I lay in a hospital bed, violently ill, shattered something deep inside me. Something I wasn't sure would ever mend. So when Jake called, my anxiety spiked. He requested another meeting, saying he had more to share. More? I echoed, feeling a familiar dread settle in. But I knew Jake well. If he said he had more information, it wasn't likely to be good. We met at the same cafe, a quiet spot where we wouldn't be interrupted. Jake took a seat, his calm demeanor unchanged, and slid a folder across the table. "There's more," he confirmed, echoing my worst fears. I hesitated, not wanting to look inside, but I knew I had no choice. The first image that caught my eye was a photo of Claire with another man. But this guy wasn't Liam. No, this was a different one, some buff, gym rat type in workout gear. His name's Zach, Jake said. He's a personal trainer at the gym your wife's been frequenting. They've been involved for months. It's gone beyond workouts. They've been meeting at his apartment, too. Couldn't believe my ears. A gym trainer? Seriously? This felt like some poorly scripted soap opera, yet it was my reality. I stared at the images of them together, her leaning into him, grinning as if nothing else mattered, like I didn't even exist. Jake laid out the details. She had started hitting the gym after my diagnosis, claiming she needed to stay in shape to cope with the stress. Right? Turns out she'd been doing far more than just exercising. They hadn't merely hooked up at the gym. She'd been sneaking off to his apartment, probably while I was stuck in bed, too weak to even stand. I was at a loss for words. Part of me wanted to explode, to yell at the top of my lungs, but instead, I sat there in shock, staring at the evidence of her second affair. Felt like my world was collapsing around me, bit by bit. But then Jake hit me with the next revelation. "There's more," he stated, his tone steady. I looked at him, bewildered. What could possibly be worse? I was already grappling with Liam and now this Zach guy. How much more could I bear? Jake produced another set of photographs. This time it wasn't at a gym or some dingy hotel. It was at a wedding. Our friend's wedding, the one we attended together, where we danced, laughed, and took pictures, looking like the perfect couple. I could still picture that day vividly. Claire was radiant in her dress, and I felt lucky to have her by my side. Or at least I thought I did. In the photos there was yet another man, this time a younger guy. He was the wedding photographer, an artsy-looking kid with a camera slung around his neck. His name was Gabriel. I remembered meeting him briefly that night, not thinking twice about it. Just another guy doing his job. But apparently he'd done a lot more than that. Jake laid it all out for me. He explained that Claire's affair with Gabriel had started that night at the wedding. While I was mingling with friends, she had been cozying up to the photographer, exchanging numbers and soon arranging secret meetups behind my back. How brazen can you get? Hooking up with some guy right under our friends' noses at a family event, completely oblivious to the devastation she was causing. I sat there, staring at the pictures of them together, feeling my stomach churn. It wasn't just the betrayal that hit me, it was the sheer humiliation. She hadn't even tried to hide it. She was having an affair with someone who had been right there with us, surrounded by friends. It made me feel like a complete fool. How could I have been so blind? With each new revelation, I felt more and more shattered. First Liam, then Zach, and now Gabriel. This wasn't just a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a disturbing pattern. Claire hadn't just betrayed me once. She'd done it repeatedly with multiple men while I was battling for my life. While I was focused on surviving, she was more interested in satisfying her own desires. The weight of it all was suffocating. I had always prided myself on seeing the best in people, believing that deep down, everyone had good intentions. But this was nothing but selfishness and deceit. I'd never felt so utterly alone. I sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, trying to process everything. Jake remained quiet. There wasn't much left to say. He had done his job, uncovered the truth, and now it was up to me to figure out how to move forward. But where do you begin when your entire world has been shattered? My mind drifted back to all those moments during chemotherapy when I felt like I was on the brink of collapse. I remembered calling out for Claire, begging her to be there for me. And where had she been? With Zach, with Gabriel, with Liam, anywhere but at my side. The realization struck me like a freight train. While I was clinging to life, she was out there living hers as if I didn't matter. I had been fighting for us, for our future, while she was busy engaging in affairs with other men. It made me feel sick to my stomach. I wanted to hate her. God, how I wanted to. But instead, all I felt was emptiness, as if something vital inside me had died. Maybe it had. Maybe the version of me who believed in love, loyalty, and commitment was gone for good. But one thing became clear. I couldn't just sit there and let this consume me. I wasn't going to allow her to destroy me completely. I needed to determine my next steps. This wasn't merely about surviving cancer anymore. It was about surviving her betrayal. And I was not going to let her win. Deep down, I understood that the real battle was just beginning. There comes a moment when you stop being the victim. When you decide you're no longer going to take the hits and realize it's time to hit back. After uncovering Claire's 3 affairs, 3 damn affairs, I knew that moment had arrived for me. I wasn't just some unfortunate guy fighting cancer anymore. No, I was ready to reclaim control of my life, of everything. That's when I called Simon. Simon had been my friend since childhood. We grew up together, ran in the same circles, and remained close even when life took us in different directions. Fortunately, Simon had become a lawyer, a damn good one, too. I knew he was the right person to help me navigate this chaos. When I called and explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "We'll handle this," he assured me. Quietly. "She won't see it coming." That was exactly what I needed. Something discreet, strategic. No loud confrontations, no drama. I didn't want Claire to have the chance to react, to play her games. I wanted everything to happen behind the scenes so that by the time she realized what was going on, it would be too late. Simon and I met the following day. We grabbed coffee at a tucked-away cafe, a place Claire would never think to look. I laid everything out for him, Liam, Zach, Gabriel, the trifecta of betrayal. Simon didn't bat an eye. He had seen worse, he said. But to me, this was the worst. The woman I had married, the one who promised to support me through sickness and health, had been out betraying me while I was fighting for my life. Couldn't wrap my head around it. Maybe I never would. "Here's our plan," Simon said, outlining his strategy. "First, we'll transfer ownership of your assets, your house, the cars, everything. She doesn't need to know what's happening until it's all done." "Can we even do that?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the legal jargon. Simon chuckled. "Ryan, she's been cheating on you for months, possibly longer. You're sick and she's neglected you. The courts will back you if it comes to that. But let's not wait for her to fight back. We'll ensure you're in control before she even knows what's happening." I trusted Simon completely, and from that moment the wheels were set in motion. I started quietly gathering all the necessary documents, anything that had both our names on it. The mortgage, car titles, our various investments. Claire remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She continued her late nights and work meetings, entirely oblivious to the fact that I was preparing to pull the rug out from under her. The legal process wasn't easy. I wasn't in the best shape, both physically and emotionally. The chemotherapy had taken its toll, and the mental anguish from discovering her betrayal weighed heavily on me. Some days, I struggled to muster the strength to get out of bed, let alone manage the logistics of transferring assets and gearing up for a divorce. But Simon kept me focused. He was my anchor, reminding me why I was doing this. "You need to protect yourself, Ryan. Don't let her take everything. She doesn't deserve it." The hardest part of all this? Maintaining the facade that nothing was amiss. Each day, I found myself sitting across from Claire, watching her navigate her life as if she hadn't obliterated mine. There were moments when she would settle beside me on the couch, scrolling through her phone, probably texting one of those jerks, and I had to restrain myself from snatching the device out of her hands and hurling it across the room. But I couldn't let her see that I was onto her. Not yet. I recall one particular night. I lay in bed, feigning sleep while she returned home late. Again. She slipped under the covers beside me, and I caught a whiff of cologne lingering on her skin. Not mine, of course. As I stared at the ceiling, my mind raced with images of her with him, with them. I wanted to scream, to throw her out right then and there, but I couldn't. I had to remain focused, stay calm. I couldn't give her the upper hand. Throughout this ordeal, I found unexpected support from someone I hadn't anticipated. Chloe. We had known each other for years, part of the same friend group, but we had never been particularly close. That changed when she learned what I was enduring. Chloe had faced a similar betrayal. Her husband cheated on her a few years back, and their divorce had been brutal and messy. But she emerged stronger, and she was there for me when I needed someone to confide in. Chloe didn't sugarcoat anything. She wasn't the type to tell me to stay strong or look on the bright side. No, she urged me to get angry. She encouraged me to stop wallowing in self-pity and start thinking about what I truly wanted. "Don't let her take everything from you, Ryan," she said one night over drinks. "You've already lost so much. Take back what's yours." Her words ignited a fire within me, providing the strength I needed to persevere. Some days, I would sit in my lawyer's office with Simon, feeling like I might crumble under the weight of it all. But then I would remember what Chloe said. I'd recall the look on Claire's face when she returned home late, believing she was fooling me, thinking I was oblivious. That was what kept me moving forward. I collaborated with Simon to ensure everything was meticulously organized. He helped me transfer ownership of the house into my name, move our savings into a separate account, and even change the beneficiaries on my life insurance policy. Each step felt like reclaiming a part of myself. Claire remained blissfully unaware. I played my role convincingly, acting like the sick, clueless husband while quietly maneuvering behind the scenes to secure my future. Finally, everything fell into place. Simon had set everything up, and I was ready to file for divorce. We agreed that the best time to serve her the papers was when she least expected it. No warnings, no drawn-out confrontations, just one swift, clean break. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't anxious. Even after everything she had done, a part of me still clung to the memory of the woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved. But that woman was gone. It was time for me to accept that reality. On the morning I planned to serve the papers, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone transformed. Stronger, colder perhaps, but definitely not the man I used to be. Cancer had stripped so much from me. My health, my peace of mind, but Claire had taken even more. And now I was ready to reclaim it all. I didn't feel good about this. I didn't feel triumphant. If anything, I felt empty. But I knew this was the only path forward. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. I was done allowing her to shatter my life. The papers were served that afternoon. Claire was out when the process server arrived, and I knew she'd be blindsided. She'd walk in, probably anticipating another night filled with lies and secrets, only to find her entire world turned upside down, just as she had done to mine. There's something darkly poetic about how life twists and turns. Here I was, emerging from chemotherapy, gradually regaining my strength. My hair was starting to grow back, my appetite was returning, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could see a glimmer of normalcy on the horizon. But as I began to heal, Claire was the one beginning to unravel. It started subtly. I remember the way she began to complain about headaches, stomach aches, little ailments that, honestly, I struggled to care about. After everything I had endured, the months of chemotherapy, the emotional and physical hell I had faced, her whining about feeling off barely registered with me. I brushed it aside. Hell, she didn't care when I was doubled over in pain from the chemo. Why should I care now? But it escalated. She started staying in bed longer, moaning about how she felt terrible, how she couldn't keep food down. Part of me wondered if guilt was finally gnawing at her. You'd think someone who betrayed their spouse so thoroughly would at least feel some remorse. Perhaps the weight of her actions had finally caught up with her. Or so I thought. It wasn't long before I discovered the real reason for her decline. One evening, after weeks of her complaining about having the flu, she broke down and confessed. I still remember the scene vividly. We were sitting at the dinner table. Not that we ate together much anymore, and suddenly, she burst into tears. It was the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in months, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of sympathy. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice quivering, her hands shaking as she wiped away her tears. I just stared at her, waiting. "I've been sick. I went to the doctor, and they found something." I didn't even blink. "Found what?" I asked, my tone flat, cold. I had long since stopped caring about her well-being. Her next words hit me like a ton of bricks, not because I was concerned, but due to the sheer irony of it all. "I have an STD. I got it from one of them." She didn't specify who. She didn't need to. I already knew it didn't matter. Liam, Zach, Gabriel. One of her lovers had given her a parting gift, and now she was left to deal with the consequences of her reckless and disgusting choices. I could barely suppress the bitter laugh bubbling up inside me. She sat there, crying, pleading for sympathy, and all I could think was, this is karma. While I was fighting for my life, she was out there sleeping with God knows how many men. Now, as I was finally beginning to heal, she was the one falling apart. Felt like poetic justice. Unfortunately, the infection wasn't easily treatable. It had spread, causing all sorts of complications, and her treatment would be long and painful. Though she didn't say it outright, I could tell she was terrified. For once, she was facing something she couldn't simply run away from or escape with her charms. After she confessed, there was a moment when Claire looked at me, her eyes searching for something. Comfort, reassurance, perhaps a glimmer of hope. But I remained frozen, staring at her with a complete sense of detachment. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she murmured, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I made a mistake. Please, let's try to fix this." In that moment, clarity struck me like a bolt of lightning. It was time to end this nightmare once and for all. I leaned forward, locking my gaze with hers, and stated firmly, "It's too late for that, Claire." I reached into my bag and retrieved the stack of papers I had been clutching for days. The divorce papers, the evidence, everything. I slammed them down on the table in front of her, watching as her expression shifted from confusion to shock. "What is this?" she stuttered, her voice barely audible. "That," I replied, my tone icy and unwavering, "is your new reality. I know about Liam. I know about Zach. I know about Gabriel. I know every single lie, every time you sneaked out while I was sick, every time you chose someone else over me while I lay in a hospital bed. And now it's over. Everything we owned is mine. The house, the money, everything. You signed away your rights without even realizing it." She sat there, stunned, her complexion draining of color as the weight of my words sank in. "But how?" she stammered, flipping through the papers and grasping that I had been one step ahead of her the entire time. A cold sense of satisfaction washed over me as I watched her process this reality. This was my victory, my moment of reclaiming control. She was powerless now, and for the first time in months, I held all the cards. Naturally, she began to plead. "Ryan, please. I was confused. I made mistakes, but I love you. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes." I didn't even blink. "Love? You don't understand the meaning of love, Claire. If you did, you wouldn't have betrayed me like this. You threw everything away, and now you must face the consequences." Her pleas grew louder and more desperate. She begged me to reconsider, to give her another chance. But I had heard enough. I stood up from the table, looked at her one last time, and declared, "You're on your own now, just as I was." And with that, I walked away. You might think that moment would feel liberating, that I would be engulfed by a sense of triumph after all she had put me through. But the reality was far more complex. Sure, there was a sense of justice in seeing her unravel, knowing she would face the repercussions of her actions. But it didn't mend the damage she had done. It didn't wipe away the months of anguish, the feelings of betrayal, the humiliation. It didn't heal the scars imprinted on my heart and soul. In the end, I didn't feel victorious. I had reclaimed what was mine, yes, but no amount of revenge could undo the past. The wounds were still fresh, still deep. Perhaps they always would be. Claire was out of my life now, legally, financially, emotionally. I was free from her grasp. But the cost of that freedom? It was steep. As much as I wanted to bask in my triumph, a part of me recognized that I'd never truly recover what I had lost. The cancer may have been vanquished, but the devastation Claire had caused? That was a different kind of affliction, one I wasn't sure I would ever fully overcome. After the divorce, I didn't experience the liberation I had envisioned. It wasn't akin to breaking free from a cage. It felt more like standing in a desolate landscape, wondering what the hell to do next. With Claire gone, all I had left was time and a chaotic whirlwind of emotions that I struggled to navigate. So I made the wise choice. I sought help. That's when Maya entered my life. Initially, she was my therapist, guiding me through post-cancer rehabilitation. I needed more than just physical recovery. The emotional scars from Claire's betrayal ran deep. Maya helped me sift through the wreckage, listening as I released my anger, my pain, everything I had bottled up for months. She never judged. She simply offered guidance. What started as a professional relationship gradually evolved into something far more meaningful. It didn't happen overnight, but one day, I realized I was no longer just looking forward to our sessions for the healing they provided. I was eager to see her. We both hesitated, aware of the boundaries, but eventually we crossed them. She transitioned from being my therapist to becoming something much more significant in my life. With Maya, everything felt refreshing. No lies, no games, just unfiltered honesty. She saw me at my lowest and chose to stand by me. While we didn't share the wild passion I once had with Claire, what we had was real and profound. Gradually, we began to discuss a future, one that was far removed from the painful past that had held me back. We decided to start anew, a fresh beginning in a different country. I needed to escape the memories, the places that carried too much pain, and Maya was wholeheartedly supportive. We moved to a quiet coastal town. Nothing extravagant, just serene and peaceful. A place where we could rebuild our lives, far removed from the wreckage of our former existence. This move symbolized more than a change of scenery. It represented a clean slate. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely. Maya and I spent our days settling in, cherishing the calm, crafting a new life together. It wasn't flashy or exhilarating, but it was ours. I still reflect on Claire occasionally, how her betrayal broke me, but also how it led me to this moment. It forced me to reevaluate everything. I wouldn't be with Maya now if it hadn't happened. Do I harbor forgiveness for Claire? Perhaps, in some ways. I've released the anger, but the scars remain. I can't forget what she did, but I refuse to let it control my life any longer. Maya and I talk about our future. Nothing extravagant, just a peaceful life together. Maybe a dog, maybe a garden. I don't crave much anymore, just tranquility. And I've discovered that tranquility with her. Claire's betrayal may have dismantled the life I once envisioned, but it afforded me the opportunity to build something authentic, something better. I finally found happiness. And for the first time in a long while, I feel at peace.